So people who come here gives you an opportunity to provoke thoughts that otherwise would never be possible. An individual who come here are the truly, in the truest sense, scholars who have done it all. And they're here to help us to think beyond what we can have the opportunity to do so. Because we're new, we're different. And the reason why we're different in some respects is because we want to be different. We wish to be different, we aspire to be different. In order for people to become different, one has to embrace the similarities before you can be different. One has to embrace the darkness before you can become one with the light and shining light. I have the speaker today who's truly a privilege to know, and a privilege to the extent that I call her a friend. It's very important to understand that. Truest scholar, but I call her Dean's Dean. More importantly, an individual whose boss called. When I went to her campus, I spoke to her boss. Not to complain, but to learn. And the provost of the University of Notre Dame, and he said, Carolyn Wu is conscious of business. She's the confidence that we will do everything right tomorrow. What a sense of endorsement. Conscious of business. Confidence that we will do okay tomorrow. Is that the caliber of individual that we're talking about? Carolyn Wu is professor, a chair professor, Ray Milan Secret Chair in Entrepreneurial Studies, and Dean, Martin Dillon Dean of Mendoza College of Business at Notre Dame. And at Notre Dame, what she's managed to create is amazingly a wonderful family. A family, she calls it, I prefer to grow old with. That's what this family is about. That's what kind of environment this my good friend has created. And of course, she was the first female chair of the ASCSB International, the accrediting agency. And today she has another hobby, or this is what I call it, a hobby to understand, to make us everybody understand, that a great country becomes great because they spread peace. A great country becomes great because we have a role as business schools to spread through commerce. You can always create everlasting peace in a nation, in a society. Because at the end of the day, the reality is the fights, the arguments, is all about resources. If we create the bread, increase the size of the bread, we increase the resources, we can prevail. Peace will prevail. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Carolyn.
I hope you don't believe everything he has told you, okay? I just want to say it's a tremendous privilege to be here. I've never been at Johns Hopkins, so it's great to have this new experience. But more important, to talk about a topic that really matters a lot to me, and it's the whole issue of business leadership in the global commons. It is a very important topic for me because I wandered into that field when I was, I think, 18 years old, just trying to choose a major. I chose economics, and there I went. Never thought, too much about it. It's like being a PhD student. Once you're into it, you just try to do research or whatever it is, you try to publish. But sort of the bigger picture was not part of my reality. But now I've been in the profession for a number of decades, and sometimes you lift your head up and you begin to realize sort of what is at stake. I think the seriousness of business leadership is, of course, now very pronounced. Very serious because of the failures that we have observed, and on the other hand, also for the potential that it can be. And so the topic has become more and more serious for me, and also to stepping back as an educator to question what do we really want to leave with our students. So it's a serious topic. I'm going to go into that, but just to give you a little bit of context about myself, I'm just going to share 4 or 5 major things that happened to me this year. One is that I celebrated my 30th anniversary, and it just seemed to fly. The second thing was that I served on the board of Circuit City, which not only went bankrupt, but it went into liquidation. And so that whole journey was a learning journey. The third thing was that in December of 2008, I had a chance to address the Secretary General of the United Nations about the role of business education in promoting a better world. And I never expected that either. By the way, is my microphone on? You can hear me? Okay. And then the fourth thing is just in July and August, I spent 10 days in total in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And the day I left Afghanistan, actually, when I woke up, I went to bed very late, like 1:30. I woke up at 7, walked down, and my team greeted me and said, "Did you hear the rockets?" So the day that I left Kabul, there were 7 rockets. Some were targeted at the airport, which I was going that day. Some were targeted at the U.S. Embassy, which I was the day before. So it was the first time that I was in that much of conflict, a conflict zone which was that intense. It was difficult to go to the airport just because if you know that that was a target. And I just heard that a few days ago, indeed, there were some bombs that ended up very near to the airport. When I went there, it was not a comfortable feeling, a sense of sort of like anything can happen. But I have to say, one of the appreciation I had was there are people who live like that every day. That every day they walk out and they are in a war zone and anything could happen. And as I started thinking about that also, it's not just in Kabul, Afghanistan, it could be in some of the neighborhoods in the United States. And so that was sort of a bonding feeling of sort of how different people live across the world. So I come before you today and to share just a few thoughts. I'm actually not going to talk a lot. There have been a lot of criticism about business education. I think some of those were deserved, some of those were not well deserved. And I don't want to get into all of those. But one criticism that I have, as one who's been in that profession and contributed to the problem, was never really raised. And I want to raise that with you. And that is, I don't think business education really prepares people to be greedy. But I think what happens along the way is that there is a way that business education narrows a person's world. Once you get into an MBA program, there is a way that you could just get lost in sort of like, how do you achieve efficiency? How do you achieve the highest return? How do you take a product and turn it into a phenomenal success? Somehow, the frame of mind of a person, of an MBA student, can get more narrow rather than broader. And it reminds me of one of my favorite books, which is written by Sharon Daylos Parks. And the title of that book is called Worthy Questions, Worthy Dreams, Big Questions. Big questions, worthy dreams. And her point really is that in education, it is really important to engage our students so that they entertain big questions and therefore formulate worthy dreams. I remember when I was a sophomore, I went to a retreat, and at that time, it was given by a priest from the Chicago 7. Now, some of you may be old enough to remember the Chicago 7. You know, they were the days of the anti-war era, the Vietnam War at that point, and also the whole racial equality. So there was this group called the Chicago 7. They did a lot of peaceful protests. They were arrested a lot. I was a sophomore at that point when one of the Chicago 7 members came to give this retreat, one of the most gentle, soft-spoken person I've ever met. I remember him saying that to these students, and I was sophomore, and he said, you know, you want your students to take risk. You want them to have a sense that they want to bet the chips on something that matters to them, because in the end, they don't have a lot to lose. And he said, if students don't learn how to risk when they have nothing, they don't really have a lot, when will they really learn to take risk? And if you think about students, we just write papers for a grade, so it's not like we have a really. And in those days, your papers don't go on the internet, so there's no trail of your thoughts. So I always remember that, and I think these are the thoughts that come back to me as I step back sometimes and look at the role of education, particularly this whole idea of worthy questions, big dreams. And so about 2 years ago, this is the second year I'm doing this, is that I actually had our IT people put together a video, because I thought, how could I get my students to, ask really big questions, worthy questions? How would I do that? How would I open them up to the world around them? So we developed a video. Video is not very long, it's about 14 minutes. And the video is about the 15 big challenges of the world. And they were not defined by me, they were defined by the United Nations. It comes from their Millennium Report, where they said these are the big issues. And I thought that it was very important to show our students the big questions. And then, of course, it's hardly 1 minute per question. So it's really a collage. And it's to get people to start before they even really sort of dive deep into the education, to have a sense of the world and the big issues of the world, the big issues which they would inherit, and also the big issues to which they will become the problem solvers. At one point, I show it to all levels, starting from the sophomores all the way through our graduate programs. I remember one time I was showing a group of juniors, a class of juniors, and we at Notre Dame have an event called the Junior Parent Weekend, where the junior parents come back. And I asked the students, I said, do you think I should show it to your parents? And they said, oh, I don't think so. And I said, why? They said, oh, my parents would be shocked. So they were protecting their parents from these big issues of the world. I thought that was quite interesting. So without further ado, I'm going to begin with this video, 15 minutes or so, a collage of the big issues that we face. I want to give a contrast to sort of the big question. I was recently at a wedding, late August, and it's two of my favorite people, my niece and her fiance, very gifted. My niece graduated from UCLA, and my nephew-in-law, I guess, graduated from the University of Chicago. And so I was with a group of 27-year-old alums of UCLA and the University of Chicago. And just so much fun. And so I asked them what they do. So there was a young man who wanted to be a fashion photographer, to break into that. So he had fancy cameras trying to take a lot of pictures. There was another guy who wanted to become a game tester. So his credential is that he needs to invent a game, write a game so that you could show that you could be a game tester. By the way, I guess these are quite difficult to break in. One young lady has a job she loves, and she's in charge of, she's the operations manager for Google Street. So she makes sure that there are cameras mounted on cars that take pictures of houses at the street level and package that data and find the right vendor in India to process that. There was one who is in LA's office for a musical production in Chicago, which is a great one called Millionaire Quartet. It's like Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, and somebody else. But so there was that. There was a graduate from the University of Chicago, loves her job, and she's an assistant editor at Oprah, the magazine, and she's in charge of recipes. One is in investment banking, and my nephew-in-law is going into graduate school for architecture, And then there was a young lady who was the event planner's assistant. She's also from the University of Chicago. I share that because I couldn't imagine the concentration of talent, in this group of people, so well educated, such great schools. But I wonder, sort of like along the way, whether they were ever inspired to think about sort of being part of a solution to bigger issues. Now, it probably reflects some value judgment, so I apologize for that. I think this generation is very creative. But I just, look at those 10, 12 young people. And my niece is now a PR person for a very haughty sort of fashion design firm, and she went to graduate school actually in fashion design and now make necklaces that Barneys pick up. All right, so very accomplished in some ways, but it almost seems sort of like a poverty in sort of inspiration. I know a lot of our young people nowadays, they do 2 years of Teach for America and those things. And they go on international service work, and that's so very important now that I think about it, because you could go through higher education without ever being challenged, kind of like an in-the-face challenge of the issues of the world. So I know a lot of you are related to the university, so I just want to say that. In that video, the person who's responsible for it is my IT person who happens to be Russian, so he has a few favorites. And one of his favorite was that young lady who was explaining to Cambodian girls in a class about the environment and clean food, clean air, clean water, and clean bodies, basically. And that young lady, her name is Danielle Pepe. She runs Pepe Tours in Cambodia. And Americans could sign up and spend your Christmas riding bikes in Cambodia with her, and she generates the revenues to start her first girls' school that goes to 6th grade. And by the way, 5th and 6th grade in a lot of developing countries are really high level. And sometimes they actually, 5th grade, will take on science topics and health topics such as tuberculosis and so on. And sometimes they may be 20-some years old and they're a 5th grader because they didn't start until they're quite old. They don't all go to school and start at 5 years old. But she did start a little girls' school that goes to 6th grade and funded it with the proceeds from this tour business. And anyone who has a perfect attendance, she will give them a bike, and she sources these recycled bikes, old bikes, from anywhere, from the United States. And because of the internet, someone, the United Arab Emirates, picked up this information and funded 5 more schools. So, sometimes these wonderful, this is one of a million of these stories of students that you have who would do things like that too. So it is very important to engage our young people of the big questions and the worthy dreams. So from there, I need to connect with business leadership. The reason that I show this to business school students is because business is an answer, is a solution, directly or indirectly, even for, the spread of bird flu. Because businesses actually have a lot of means, whether it is developing the particular virus, making those available at a reasonable cost, early prevention, early detection, how do you set up systems, basically, to do those things. There is not one issue here where business does not have a role, even in the whole area of sort of the global crime network. Think about just recently what the US government did to the Swiss government by requiring them to disclose people who have secret accounts. How do you think this money move in the world? So there is not one problem in there where business is not a major player and could be a solution. And so that's why it is important to make that connection. At Notre Dame, which is founded by an order of French priests in 1842, the founding mission has always been to be a force for good. What has been good is that throughout these 160 years or so, we've never lost that sense. That message, that education should be a force for good and what we do should be a force for good, has carried on through successive generations of presidents, faculty, deans, and so on. So I've inherited a mission that I'm very proud of. Our founding dean himself was actually a cardinal. He became a cardinal, so I'm not going to follow his footsteps. But he also believed that business was to be a force for good. But every year, every 2 years, you know, the MBA students, the undergraduate students, they need to develop their own wording for what these values mean. And about 2 years ago, we went into a journey where we said, we really do have a point of view about business. We have a point of view about business education. And we need to articulate our point of view much better. So we started a journey that ended up in, you know, the most tangible part of it is a web redesign. But a web redesign without content is not good. If we are just carrying a message and it doesn't really stand for what we do, we don't practice by that message, it's not very good. So I actually went through a lot of soul searching to say we don't want to do a branding message, we don't want to just do a logo, we don't want to have a tagline, but we want to be really very sincere and authentic about what we believe in. And so that journey started 2 years ago, and I'm going to show you sort of our point of view and how we capture and what it means to us. So I'm going to try to do this. All right, I'm going to do laptop. I'm going to do escape. And do I do laptop again?
Yep, that looks good.
Okay, so I'm going to go down here. All right. This is our website that was launched August 1st. I'm just going to try to get it to here so that you can see our website. What you basically see is, okay, on the top there, which I just scrolled over, is the usual type of thing, you know, information on program, on faculty, on research, or whatever it is. And on the sidebar here, again, you see sort of like programs and departments. Those are pretty standard. What has changed really is the 80% of the real estate of this website, and it is that we do have a point of view. Our point of view is that we need to ask more of business. And I just want to say when we launched this 2 years ago, and about last year, 2 years ago we came up with this, but it took about a year of implementation. When we moved into implementation of this Ask More of Business was sort of like about July of 2008. And of course, September, the whole financial market crashed. And people say, Carolyn, do you still want to ask more of business? It's like asking these wounded, you know, entities to step up more. They could hardly move, you know. Are you sure you want to do it? I said, absolutely. Absolutely, this is an important time for this. And actually what we do is that we say ask more of business to us really means 3 things. It begins with individual integrity. And the second thing that is that organizations have to be effective. That's what we're trying to teach our students. And if you look at all of the Sarbanes-Oxley, all of the regulations and so on, it's really going after the incentives, the control systems, and so on that hopefully will generate right behavior. So from individual integrity to the way that an organization is systems, is formal culture, informal culture, and so on, combines the use of incentives, the use of information transparency, and so on, to create organizations which are clean, which can produce the right action. And then the third leg of what we mean is that business for society. That there are multiple stakeholders. It's not just shareholders. It's not just about profit maximization at all costs. It's about profit. Without profits, business cannot exist, really. But it's about a sustainable way of generating profits that do not do harm to the other people who have impacted by those business decisions. Because business has a very big footprint. It's big feet, big foot. It could go step down and all sorts of things could happen. So we said we do know what we mean when we say ask more business. We're asking more of those 3 things. And that's what we want to inculcate in our business education. And Dean Gupta here has a wonderful plan for the Hopkins MBA program. And we look at ourselves and say, in the end, what is the message that gives us our passion? Our message is that we do need to ask more of business. We need to ask more of ourselves. And for all of these things to turn around, it's not just new laws, you know, but it starts with individual integrity and so on. And what this website is, and you can go on our website, it's just www.nd.edu and then go into the business school. But we basically populated it, you know, every part of it for startup no time to waste. These different things. I don't have my glasses with me, so that I'm squinting. Greater good. Can business help transform the world? This is the CEO of, I think, Sarah Lee, and say, having it all, managing work and life balance. This one, see, this is how sensitive it is. Cheating to make the sale. That is a piece of research to show how many opportunities there are to lie when you're in the middle of a sales cycle. This is Professor Anton Brunzel. Are you too powerful for your own good? So basically, we express our research, we organize our faculty research, our curriculum around these three things so that there is content for people to learn from, so that there is a sense of accountability of how do we make this real. So let me just try to go back sorry, I don't know how that happened. Okay, this is good again. Let me just see. No, this is not what I want. I'm trying to call up a video. Okay, so you can see for me that I do believe that there is a tremendous need, and I could go in some more on each one of those. By the way, on individual integrity, most people know right from wrong, actually. There are studies that show that when nobody's neck is on the line, if you say, should Martha Stewart lie? And of course the answer is no. And in fact, in a lot of cross-cultural studies across all types of segments, from high school students to lawmakers to Japanese executives and so on, when they list the 5 most important values that they cherish, truth-telling is always one of those 5. But wanting it and knowing right from wrong does not lead to doing. And in fact, there's a lot of research that shows knowing does not lead to doing. So there's a whole journey of how you engage young people to go through this whole thinking of why is it that knowing does not lead to doing? And that I could give a lecture on that by itself. All right. So, and also wanting to do the right thing is not enough. You actually do have to do the right thing. And so this whole idea of moral development, does it stop when you are 18 years old? Or does it go on? And what are the triggers for moral development? And where does courage come from? So there's a whole body of work and research and so on relating to individual integrity. And of course, business school, the type of research we do is really about, how do you build effective organizations at the right climate? And now there's a whole body of research which is emerging about the role of business on society. What I want to do is that we have a little bit of a 4-minute video that sort of put it together in some ways. So I'm going to show you.
Opportunity. Here we find hope. Here, the call for a new way of leading. A fresh vision of a better way of doing things, of changing lives, and in doing so, changing the world. Business is powerful. Just 300 multinational companies control 25% of the world's assets. Business can solve some of the most pressing problems affecting the human community by providing jobs, healthcare, education, even peace. But to find answers, we need to ask more. Ask more of business. It's actually not enough to want to do the right thing. You actually have to do the right thing. So wanting
story needs to be more timely, more truthful, and more transparent. As a business leader, you need to remember those you're accountable to. Shareholders, employees, creditors, customers, and the larger community.
To be a real leader in today's business requires not just a deep understanding of your own firm's operations and the competitive economic environment in which you operate, but also a knowledge of the broader impact on people's lives. Businesses ultimately produce and distribute goods and services to mankind. And so successful businesses will ultimately be judged by their contribution to the world community.
When we were in Bosnia and Lebanon, we saw was physical damage from the war, but also a damage to the spirit of people.
But we also saw rebuilding. We heard stories of hope from business leaders, and we saw that business really is way back to a decent, peaceful life. Let us use this opportunity to inspire our students, to enable them to see how they, through business, can become solutions to issues as big as poverty and peace, and also as routine as a safe work environment, the training of a worker, payday with something left over for savings, a day of schooling for a young African girl, a meal to come home to, and fuel and clean water that make these possible. You know, people often talk about challenges, but what we should do is to wrap our minds around the concept of opportunity. The Chinese think of opportunities as the intersection of problems with readiness. And to be ready, we must ask more of business and ask more of ourselves. At the Mendoza College of Business, University of Notre Dame, we will step up in 3 ways. One is to foster the sense of personal integrity grounded in rigorous problem solving. The second is to cultivate the organizational culture and systems that will lead to the right actions. And third is to advocate for business to succeed in a way that advances the well-being of our planet and of the people of the planet. Ask more business. Ask more me.
Ask more of business.
Ask more of me. Ask more of me. Ask more of me.
Ask more. Ask more. Ask more.
Ask more of business. Ask more of yourselves.
So just to end this, I think I was reading the newspaper today when I was traveling. I think it's USA Today. I said by Wall Street Journal too. But I think it was in the USA Today where they talked about that they were looking at college completion rate. And they said that the completion rate is higher for schools that ask more of their students. They have high expectations. So I just want to end this. You know, I could open up for questions. You could ask me whatever you want to ask. I may not be able to answer it. But this whole idea really is that business plays an extraordinary role. I mean, it is, it cuts across all of these national governments. It has a global footprint and leverage on local governments in ways that you can't even imagine. It could use that influence for good things. It could use that influence for very bad things. And along the way, business is not just a theoretical entity. It's made up of people. And so a lot of our students will be going into that environment, and how we encourage them and what type of expectations we set for them is very important. So I'm going to pause right here. It's 6 o'clock already. I couldn't imagine it went so fast. But go ahead and whatever questions you have, I'll take it up.
We were with somebody from Xerox the other day, a senior corporate officer, who talked about this new generation of people who've been going through this kind of transformational view of business education, and asked about the challenge of how you then incorporate an individual like that who wants to ask more questions, who is pushing the corners, if you like, a little bit. How do you, in a huge, large organization that's very hierarchical and quite structured, adapt to those students and also to help those students adapt to these behemoth organizations? And given your experience with Circuit City, maybe you've got a perspective to share.
Let me give you just 3 examples of programs which are in place. So the United Nations started in the year 2000 a program called the United Nations Global Compact. It's a voluntary initiative where it encourages corporations to sign on voluntarily and abide by 10 principles. They relate to human rights, labor rights, sustainability, and anti-corruption. Those are the 10 principles. About 3 years ago or 2 years ago, it started tightening the accountability measures because a lot of people signed on, but they were not serious. So they actually, at that point, had about 3,500 organizations, companies across the world, and they decertified 800. And then after that, their membership actually grew. US companies were very reluctant to join, but in the last years, it doubled in membership. And now the US companies that join are very large. They're like the McDonald's, General Electric, all the big accounting firms, Dow Chemical, Symantec, which is your antivirus, and so on. I actually wrote a chapter on that. Across the world now, there are 5,000 corporations which have signed on to this, to the UN Global Compact. I don't believe that they're all completely squeaky clean, but I think it's the beginning of a movement. Just to give you some sense, how big is the number 5,000? These are not all publicly traded companies, but the Russell 10,000 across the world, there are 10,000 companies across the world publicly traded that represent 98% of the traded equities. So you can see it's building momentum. And along with that too, the UN Global Compact is going to collaborate with the ISO organization, the International Standards Organization. The ISO 9000, which was the quality standard, was very popular and is now adopted by over 1 million units, operating units. The ISO now has also written a set of standards on corporate responsibility, and they're in draft form right now. It will probably come out in final form a year from now, but again, as a voluntary standard, not a mandatory standard. So at some very big level, corporations are trying to do this. And of course, when I talk to the corporate office, the CEOs, there are different degrees of sort of enlightenment. But before I finish that, the CEOs also now are facing a lot of pressure to demonstrate that they are corporately responsible, they're responsible citizens and so on. So there's a lot of other pressures, whether it's from credit rating agencies or whether it's from investors and so on CEOs and on boards to do that. So that's a very macro sort of program. A very low-level program, for example, the Aspen Institute just started a new program which is called social entrepreneurship. And it takes applications from people within very large companies like the Xerox and the Nestle and the British Petroleum, where these are the young people, high-flying young people within their organizations, and they write a proposal for business ideas that actually address the third world and other types of social good. So this is embedding that whole idea of entrepreneurship and social awareness to take, if you're Nestle, chocolate production or water usage or whatever, that sort of thing that has a social mission attached to it. So that's a second example. A third example, for companies that really value the talent of their people, like the Big Four consulting firms, because they rely on these people. PwC, for example, has a program where for the causes, the social causes that PwC endorses, and they're quite big actually, they're global causes. An employee can take as many hours to volunteer as he or she chooses, so long as they get their work done. Now that's unheard of before. And also there's one of the public accounting firms to allow people to take sabbaticals now, to do this sort of thing. So slowly, there are those. So it's happening. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Xerox may be one of the signatories of the UN Global Compact, which reflects a problem. And that is sometimes these things are signed at the corporate headquarters, but they're not filtered yet. Right? And so there's a lot of work to be done to filter it. Okay?
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. And I learned a lot. One question is on the supply side, when we are educating our MBAs and new people, that they have these things in mind and ask more for business. And the UN Global Compact on the other side, how can we institutionalize it in the world from being a norm, like ISO 9000, even expanded? You must comply with A, B, C, D, E, F in order to be part of that, in fact, compact or signatory of that compact. Because some people may say, yes, I am, but they don't.
They don't do that.
They don't do that. But in the business world, some customers, in fact, they demand their companies or their organization or their suppliers that you must comply with what we said, in fact, ISO 9000. Otherwise, I will go to somebody else. Or you must comply with CMM, that the Carnegie Mellon University's framework. Otherwise, I will not buy from you. So the key is how can we transfer it from normative framework to a regulative institutional form?
Okay, I think I have 4 or 5 points to it. So let's go back to the UN Global Compact. First of all, it's voluntary. The issue there is accountability. If you sign up and you don't do anything, then that's not very good, all right? So that's why they had to tighten down and look at the reporting and also do auditing to see if it's real. But the joining of it is still voluntary. It's not mandated yet. But the accountability there becomes very important, right? The second thing is that even for the ISO, I think it's a 26,000 standard that will come out. They are still going to make it mandatory. No, not mandatory, they're optional. And it's a guidance standard rather than a mandatory standard. They still want people to choose to do it. And the reason is that you can't mandate people to be ethical in the end, because there are so many ways to go around it. There's so many games that you could play. I think that's my signal of talking. But again, the ISO standards are so very specific. The forms are just overwhelming, actually. Now, you can ask, by the way, there are other sort of standards, like the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And so if you're a company and say, I want to be considered in that index, that the portfolio of companies that's called the Dow Jones Sustainability, that formulate the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, it also has very strict requirement in terms of how you report. In fact, it has phase 1 requirement, phase 2, phase 3. So you could graduate into, and you have to report publicly in your annual report. Now, why do firms want to do that? It's a pain, actually. The reason is that they're concerned that down the road, investors will say, if a company is not part of the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, it cannot be in my retirement portfolio. In fact, you could have a university where the employees of the university said, as a group, we don't want any company which has not been certified to be in this. And so there's actually a lot of pressure now, the type of healthy pressures, where if you're a customer, if you go and pay attention to Starbucks and maybe Target, when you go in, sometimes they have all these literature, that are stacking there. You will see they will actually have this literature on corporate citizenship by Target or corporate citizenship by Starbucks, because they're very concerned about customers eventually deselecting them. And a lot of these things that they're looking at now, they actually find that whether it is the environmental architecture and so on, that actually at the beginning it costs more money, but then you become a lot more efficient. Look, if you're watching your carbon footprint, you're burning something less. And eventually you could sell your carbon credits. And so there's actually a lot of financial and customer benefits associated with it. The final thing I want to say, why do you think all of the accounting firms now are part of the UN Global Compact? It's because they have a lot of global clients. And European companies now are mandating that their suppliers, and the big four are suppliers to these companies. They are mandating suppliers. And companies can mandate suppliers to be certified in a particular way. And some of the US companies too are also certifying. So actually the supply chain is also pulling some of those things in. To the extent that I come from Hong Kong, and a year ago or so, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, which is one of the most free market sort of entity you could ever met, have disclosure requirement along the UN Global Compact, labor rights issues and environmental issues. You have to think about the Hong Kong Stock Exchange having requirements of the listing companies to list those things. And why? Why is that so? Because a lot of the Chinese companies that register with the Hong Kong Stock Exchange are supply chain companies to the European, Japanese, US companies. So it's coming. So there's push and pull, there's enlightenment as well as pressure. Charlene?
Carolyn, I like what you're doing at Mendoza, and since I'm in human resources, I'm always thinking about how we can get these principles in our own organization and university. Have you had the opportunity to work or even considered working with your human resources organization or advised other organizations, other universities in terms of working with their own human resources organization to advance these principles?
The very honest answer is no. I mean, first of all, I'm going in a million and zillion directions. And it's one of those things that my effect would be on, you know, getting this message out. This message is still quite young, quite early, to tell you the truth. So I have no more energy to go and convince someone else. Do you see what I mean? It's the difference between sort of like the luxury of giving talks, you know, which I fill my life with these talks, to really sitting down and say, I'm going to drive that group. Now, I drive our group. The Mendoza College of Business is a signatory to the education branch of the UN Global Compact. So just even driving my own college takes a lot of energy. Do they understand it? I think some of these videos and some of these websites and so on and so forth is a way of creating, even though we say, oh, we care about ethics and so on, is to take it to the next level. What do we mean by this? And how do we just sort of have these concepts right in our heads as sort of like part of the way we think about things? So Charlene, my honest thing is that no, I've not worked very hard to beat on other people to get it done. But it should be.
I have a question. My question has to do with the role of the business school in the urban environment. Do you see a role where business schools in urban environments like Baltimore can play a role to develop and mentor entrepreneurs?
No questions.
And so that they are developing and understand what it means to develop a business plan and to develop a business, so that that is the vehicle to change the environment so it becomes much more an opportunistic environment. And do you see that happening at any business schools currently, where the faculty and the dean and the students are involved in mentoring and developing businesses out of the environment that is hopeless?
Yeah. I would say that is a marriage made in heaven for both parties. Actually, the community benefit, and actually students get these type of first-hand experience. And actually a lot of business schools. So in my prior role as chair of AACSB, I actually did a survey and have schools fill in sort of like the type of activities they have in this area. So a lot of schools participate. The difficulty really is you need some type of a well-formed infrastructure between community and the school. If the school also has to invest in the infrastructure of having community centers that, you know, also you need the community to recruit those entrepreneurs before the school can really plug in. So that infrastructure generally is missing. So there are a lot of activities, but they tend to be ad hoc in nature, or they tend to be small scale in nature. So I would say we stepped up our activities a lot after Notre Dame bought a Goodwill store in a sort of somewhat a low-income neighborhood. The Goodwill store was closed. It was an ugly piece of property. It tends to induce crime and all of those bad things. So it was really, I don't know how much we really had to pay for it, but it was one of those things that the mayor basically, can you take it over? So we bought that, we turned it into the community center. It's called the Robinson Center Community Learning Center, where we started creating as a place where children can come after school. There are computers and so on. They started offering courses there. So we put in a little incubator there where people could come in to take entrepreneurship courses. And actually there is software, online learning, that you handle, you use some of that to leverage your own efforts. And then students come over and work with these startups. So absolutely, but it does need an investment in infrastructure.